Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today we're having a conversation around Dwellings of Eldervale and Andromeda's Edge. Now, why does this conversation matter? Well, first and foremost, we've just spent the entire week playing and demoing and recording and filming and diving into Andromeda's Edge. It's going to be coming to Gamefound in January from Cardboard Alchemy. Peter is here showing it to us and having a grand old time. But both of these games are designed by Luke Laurie, and a lot of people online are talking about Andromeda's Edge really kind of being a love letter, a sequel, a follow-up on Dwellings of Eldervale. And for those of you that don't know, Dwellings kind of has taken parts of the industry by storm. There is demand for it that just cannot be met. There is a lot of people that have added it to their top 10, even put it as Game of the Year, according to some Dice Tower folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of those conversations that I think is maybe a little bit too early to have, but for the hardcore fans out there is, in my opinion, something that is worth talking about. I want to take a look at what Dwellings of Eldervale did, why it took the industry by storm, and then what Andromeda's Edge is doing that not only pays homage to the predecessor, but also starts maybe twisting some of the knobs, re-implementing, or taking a look at how you can do things better. Because how many years of your life was development on this game?
It was 7 years on Dwellings.
Okay.
That is because sometimes you make a game and it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
The very first time Luke and I tried to put it to the table, it had a little bit more storytelling to it. It had like a market of story cards and exploration, and it just didn't work. He shelved it. He even wrote in an article, "What's a game that you wish had come together?" And he said, "Oh, a long-lost game called Dwellings of Eldervale."
Nice.
And then, if any of you have played Cryo, he tried some things in Cryo that actually gave him the idea of how to solve Dwellings. At that time, that was all in a sci-fi universe, and I asked him to change it to fantasy. And so we actually shifted to fantasy.
Interesting.
And finally found Dwellings, finally found its core, and then made it with Breaking Games.
I mean, you were fairly integral in the creation of this beast. 7 years it was on like the table and then off the table and then back on the table.
Sure.
And for you, you kind of have a very sweet spot for Dwellings. I mean, this is sort of your baby in a lot of ways.
It is, because I was playing a lot of these Euros that are about, like, say, farming. And I was on a drive with Luke down the California coast, and I said, I want a game about a wizard and a Balrog. Not that I mind the farming dry games once in a while, but I wanted the theme. I wanted something that felt, I want to play the rats or the elves or the dwarves or the centaurs. I wanted that. So then Luke made that. So it was so exciting.
And so when people say that Andromeda's Edge is sort of your all's follow-up, your sequel to Dwellings in a lot of ways.
A friend of mine that calls it Eldervale.
Terrible. What is the truth behind that? Is Andromeda's Edge a follow-up on the Dwelling system? Is it a love letter to what you've done here?
Well, Luke Laurie actually is the thoroughfare to all of his games that have... He's a worker placement guy. He's an engine building guy, right? If you look at Cryo, if you look at Whistle Mountain, if you look at Energy Empire and you look at Dwellings, they have a consistency to them. So you're going to see some of that same DNA.
Yeah.
But yes, specifically, we wanted to do a big box game again.
Yeah.
Right, we wanted to do some of that thing, and I love Dwellings. And I'm not going to lie about this part. I'm now with Cardboard Alchemy. It's a company I run with Brad Brooks, and I miss not being the. I want to be the publisher of Dwellings. I'm not right now, and yes, we do want a game like that. And I asked Luke. I'll be honest. I actually said to Luke, "Could we make a game like that?" And he said, "I would like to innovate on that. I would like to change that." And I said, "Sure. I would love to see what you want to do." And this is the answer. So,
for those of you that are watching, please keep in mind, the prototype that we're showing here is about 5 months ahead of the curve. We're getting a chance to display it. You're actually inviting people over to your Discord if they want a chance to play test and prototype and help you all figure out what the foundation of this game is. But the mechanics are up and running, and we'll have gameplay here on Quackalope for you to check out and see what all of those are. This is a conversation about the high tones, the points that people are going to be asking. How does the engine building work? How does the dwellings themselves work? How do things run adjacent and yet still stand out on their own?
Sure.
Devin, you are here.
I'm here.
Because you're a massive fan of Dwellings.
Thank you.
It's all right.
Just a gentle.
It's all right.
So Devin, take 30 seconds or so and
Okay.
talk about Dwellings and talk about what it is that drew you into it as a game.
So I was talking about this with Peter a little bit earlier this week, and I think that a lot of games that are described as hybrid games, they're described as some combination between, Ameritrash or Euro, as Luke would say, transatlantic.
Yeah, that's the term.
And I don't always think that they kind of sit squarely in the middle, or that the union of them mechanically actually works really tightly and really well. But Dwellings is just such a good combination of a tableau builder, an engine builder that is very tightly wound and very smoothly and polished. And it feels so satisfying when you get that combination of the elements and the dwellings and your location. Everything about your strategy, when it comes together in Dwellings, feels so rewarding. But the other thing that I think is interesting about Dwellings as a worker placement game, and that really struck me as a satisfying design element, was the idea that your placement of workers and then also your recall, or you're taking them back, that's typically in most games like Lords of Waterdeep or other games that are similar to it, that's a very, it's a dry phase. Nothing actually happens. Sure. You place and then you bring back. But that was innovated on, and you actually get just as much, sometimes more rewarding actions when you're returning 100%. Them to your thing. And it's just so satisfying.
We don't ever want to have a bad turn ever, right? I mean, once you've played that game, you look at worker placement games and why are we having a boring turn back? What is that?
Yeah. So that's so interesting to me. I really like that. But the other element that I think is fantastic is that you really can create your own strategy that you follow through with, and also your factions that have their own powers. They kind of influence in minor ways how you're going to approach the worker placement aspect, and then the particular elements that come out, the particular monsters that come out. Every single time you play Dwellings, it feels different.
Oh man, if you're playing the rats and you have a tentacle dragon, and then the chaos cards are doing random stuff, versus when you play with water, which is transforming stuff, or darkness, which is sacrificing your own units, I agree 100%.
I also think that one thing that Dwellings does well is that it feels very different in good ways at each player count. The solo system is very satisfying when you're playing against the Ghosts of Eldervale. 2-player feels like this really tight competition over who's going to dwell in certain locations first. And then when you get to 3 and 4 players, it becomes this kind of big sprawling experience where sometimes you're focusing on yourself, sometimes you're focusing on mitigating other players, and it's always kind of this tight decision space of what makes the most sense right now with what I'm able to do. And you're always able to do something.
And if you've ever played 5-player, someone gets wrecked. I mean, seriously.
So, let's talk about the comparison now. Now, we asked you to jot some notes just on the high level. You and Devin actually talked just off camera for a bit, going back and forth between what was working, what was different, what was innovated on. What are some of the high level points that we want to direct some attention to, and that we think audiences are going to be asking about? Because this is just a fan service video. If you're watching at this point, you love Dwellings. You're a fan of Peter Vaughan. You're a fan of Luke Lore. You're a fan of the stuff that they've created. And you want to know, should you be selling Dwellings immediately to wait for Andromeda's Edge? Should you have
Do
both?
not do that. It is hard enough to get access to Dwellings.
Should you have both on your shelf?
Yes.
Or, are they going to be competing for the same space?
Thank you for saying that, because I agree with that.
All right. What are some of the points we want to go through?
Devin just reminded me of one that I want to talk about right off the bat, because actually solo play is changing.
Oh, interesting.
So Luke designed the Ghosts of Eldervale, and I think we can all agree that's a pretty solid solo play. That was actually one of his first solo modes ever created. Now, people have pointed out some of the weaknesses of that because the ghosts are not scalable. So what did he do? He's coming into Andromeda with a faction called Unity, and Unity is going to chase you down. But he's established 3 levels of Unity, and he's given each of those levels their own commanders, so there's actually different opponents in each level. And on top of that, you can add Unity to any player count.
Yeah,
a 3-player game,
3 to a 4.
Add your AI. So actually that's going to be really interesting to see. You're having a multiplayer experience, but there's also this thing trying to hunt you all down.
I do love that approach as a designer, because sometimes you can design something and then you go and you see the fan response to it and they're like, this wasn't good enough. And you might be like, A fair response is just, you're wrong. I designed this for a long time, and I worked really hard on it.
Yeah.
And I love that Luke is like, oh, you don't think it's scalable enough? Give me a moment. It's like, I'll fix that.
I got you.
So that's one really cool element. What are some of the other features? What are the core like structures here?
Well, one of the things we did is that Luke is actually, when he builds prototypes, I don't know if anyone knows this, because you're looking at this is the rough stage, right?
Yeah.
But there's an even rougher stage where Luke actually takes dowels and other pieces of wood and carves things. He carves things. He uses his own...
He shares them on Facebook.
He uses his own D&D minis, and he'll put those, and he'll carve wood pieces. And one of the things he did on Dwellings is he took a meeple and he put a rooftop on it. And that was actually kind of undersold in Dwellings, but it was really unique because you didn't have to move the meeple out of the way and have it be somewhere else, and it didn't matter.
Sure.
You actually made the piece functional and said, this will be a building. Well, then I said to him, what are you going to do in Andromeda's Edge? And he's like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually have it so that you have a leader, and then there'll be an observatory, and the leader forms the rest of the observatory. Yeah. Or there'll be a city, and the leaders form the city, or the factory. He has taken Dwellings up a notch. Now there is a different building type on each different region, so now you can build spaceports, and you can build observatories and obelisks, great obelisks to the sky. You know, so there's now this really fun element of each one has different powers.
Devin, about a minute ago, thought it was a really good idea to hunt through his phone, and then has not found what he was looking for.
He said that the thing was undersold about the meeples having roofs on them, and like I wrote a huge review on the blog back when I first started, and that was like one thing that I focused on. I was like, this is the most satisfying production thing ever, is to have a meeple and to put a roof on it.
I think it got lost though.
Find it.
The game was so big box and crazy that the monsters were something we were talking about. The slotting was something we were talking about. And then all of a sudden the fact that you put these rooftops on, which by the way was a production challenge that was super fun to solve.
This in prototype form is remarkably satisfying to use. Because you have this, like, you have your ship. This is your worker. This must attach to there. Then you knock in your little pieces. And suddenly the building is yours. And it looks like yours. And it's customized.
Well, aren't all games sort of basically a tactile toy experience anyway?
Absolutely.
I mean, why else did we do sound bases, right? We wanted to have these things. These are fun things to play with. And in this case, too, you're going to build great, huge developments on planets.
Now, you mentioned slotting a few times. It's something that was new in Dwelling, something that was, like, innovative in that game system. What are we doing here? What's kind of coming
actually,
to
a fun
to par?
story about slotting was that Luke first put it in Cryo, but sometimes games take a long time in development.
Yeah.
So he started it in Cryo, and I was jealous of it then. I said, oh, this is something I haven't seen. A customizable card the way that I want to build. And then Cryo took a long time in development with Z-Man. And while it was in development, Luke said, I think I'm actually going to put it on these adventure cards. So Dwellings, which launched on Kickstarter, was the first to debut slotting, even though Cryo was in production at that time. And now what we've done here is Luke's got quite familiar with slotting. He's addicted to it now. And so we've got certain modules in the game which are going to have slotting just like Dwellings, and other modules that are going to have slotting in a brand new way. Plus we've got, if you play Dwellings and you've ever lost a battle and you get a sword and you're like, okay, at least I got a sword. In this game, you can actually slot your lost condition, and there's lots of ways to play that.
You can control the way that you actually interact with losing ships
fun,
in a way that makes losing ships potentially the best option you can have.
Exactly. I'm going to go... Now, that's a little bit there in Dwellings, too. Sometimes you deliberately go for the Loki strategy and you go there. But it's here in a big way that you can actually play this a lot of different ways. And he's aware, too... There's so many interesting differences. So a lot of times people will look at it and say, well, is it the same game? No. It's not the same game.
Markedly not.
So one of the other things that we heard is that the engine building in Dwellings is a little light. It's fun to grab an adventure card. Some of those are really fun to trigger once. But other ones, you're like, I wish I could have fired that 3
You're not doing a full production cycle,
So in Andromeda's Edge, what we have instead is sort of, it's the edge of the galaxy and there's space junk everywhere. There's the ancient remnants of a precursor civilization. And you attach those to your space station, and you get a big chunk of those. So that when you're running your engine, it's a big deal. You're actually able, here's another thing, Luke Laurie in Energy Empire allowed you to not only recall and use workers, but to use energy. He's mashed that in here. So now you're using spaceships and energy to fire quite a big engine, firing your reactor, firing your industry shipwright, getting all of these things to function that you can build yourself is much more satisfying.
There's times where I've seen Devin go through the process of pulling back a worker, triggering a card, tossing some energy on, playing a tactics card, and going through 12 or 15 different little activations for this one big recall action.
Yeah.
Which
never helped me win.
In a lot of Euros is the, like we said, refresh and cycle part of the game. And in this, it can sometimes be the most essential part. And then when it comes to my play style so far, that hasn't really been a core structure to it. Recall's been helpful, but never the foundation. It's actually been the activations and the special powers of each unit that's really shown for me.
Yeah, you have options. Definitely. Yeah. I think also Luke is saying out there, and I think it's fair to say that this is a deeper game. Do you think you'd say that?
Oh, I think it's got a quite... I think that Dwellings is actually not as... It's more accessible than it seems, and that I think it's actually ranked or commented on. I think it's more approachable. Right. But I do think that this has another layer or two of depth, given the engine building with the modules, given a lot of the decision space with the variable ship powers. I do think there's more going on here that you're going to have to consider from like a strategy perspective.
I'm glad you brought up variable ship powers, because it's another thing that I want to touch on. It's actually something that I do like a lot about Dwellings from a theme point of view, but I want to settle down and play the pirates or the ogres. I want to play the dwarves. And in general, what we did in that game is we put 2 abilities on each. Not always the same, not always, but there was sometimes there was a really good one and kind of a weaker one. But in general, your dragon was baked a certain way. In this game, I think Luke originally attacked it a little bit like Scythe, that you'd mix board A and board B. That didn't work out when we first tried it. So what we now have is we have a faction which has asymmetry. But layered on top of that, you now customize your dragon and your wizard. Yeah. And so what happens in this game is everyone starts with a transport, a fighter, a science vessel, and a heavy cruiser that they can build.
Just the base levels.
These are the 4 worker types. But now during the game, you can say there are these upgrades available that you can get to on certain tracks. And you can say, I would like to reinforce my transports. I would like to give my fighter the ability to fly into a nebula. I would like to take the heavy cruiser and make it more of a, that it can settle on planets. I mean, you could sort of change your dragon. You can make your own.
And not only that, but every faction actually has its own special unit that comes with it as well.
Yes. Now that was something, because I told Luke what I was missing a little bit when we started Dev was I'm missing the rats. I'm missing the
personality.
I want that personality. So instead what he said to me, he's like, I got you. We're going to make the Funganor, and they're going to have a toxic ship that only they can build.
Yeah.
And we're going to have...
It's always available to them.
Yeah, and we're going to have a mech faction that can build a ship called the Terminator. I was like, now you're talking. Now we're in.
Well, what's interesting is I've seen some players so far over the course of this week upgrade nearly every ship to something cool and something special.
Yeah. And
in my play, I have never used a single ship other than my base settlement ship.
Yeah.
And I've only ever upgraded it with my faction-specific ability.
Right.
And even there, it felt unique and felt rewarding.
Good. That's awesome. See, in Dwellings 2, one of the things that was neat about it was if you're playing the rats, you did not need to get your tentacle dragon to win. Yeah. It was a fun way a lot of people would say, this faction's a little unbalanced, this is a little unbalanced. But actually, I believe any good player could win with any faction without relying on your specials.
Calling you out.
Ooh.
I'm just saying, I think that was one of the most fun parts, is that you could explore your faction special.
You didn't have to.
Or you could play the game in front of you. These were almost a distraction that you could get caught up in. Like, I must use my Plundering Dragon? No, you could actually win without it. But does it help you if you want to lean into it? Of course. In this game, you can, like you said, avoid it. Or say, you know what, actually, this type of transport is going to help me do what I want to play as, so I'm going to make sure I upgrade that transport.
Everything's tied into that just efficiency system, that kind of engine that you're building. If it works and it kind of slots into the right place, amazing. But I think there are a lot of little rabbit holes you can go down in this game that actually lead you away from that victory.
Yeah.
When it comes to the end, there's a lot of fun things to explore, and you can't really do all of them at the same time. And that's similar to Dwellings in a lot of ways.
Right, yeah.
There's those little distractions.
Absolutely.
And they're really cool. And they make noise, and they scream, and you feel powerful.
Yeah.
And then you realize that like doing that was what wasted 3 of your turns.
Yep. There's still the same traps. There's still all that, but there's a lot more under your control as well. For anyone who's played Manhattan Project Energy Empire, there's a kind of a timer in that game, which allows you as a player to decide in that game how much pollution you want to cause, which will cause the timer to end. And in this game, there are certain ways to advance the clock. We're not sure if what we're calling that clock yet, but basically any given player can say, I want to do things that are going to trigger scoring rounds. That is a lot of control over the end game. The end ends differently here in Dwellings.
Yep.
And you can control that end.
Now, one of the biggest things I heard people complain about from Dwellings.
Yeah.
We can
Is that
argue
they can't get it, and it's too awesome. I also have heard those complaints so much.
I also have heard.
I've heard that, right?
We can argue around whether or not they think they're right or not, but you're actually picking up the thing that I'm talking about.
Combat. What are we going to do about
One
this?
of the biggest elements of Dwellings that either was a hit for people or just didn't work was the introduction of dice-based combat.
What if I was to tell you that we still have dice-based combat?
Oh.
And it's not only the same, but better.
Okay.
All right?
Compelling.
We have added 3 main things to the combat, which is we've added targeting, which is a way of keeping a minimum roll. We've also added...
I really like targeting.
We've also added diplomacy, which can, at the key start of battle, change the texture of the battle.
Yep.
And then in addition to that, we've also added... what's the other thing I wanted to say about that? Oh, shielding. Now, that's sort of the tactic tokens we had before. Every once in a while, peppered into this game, we have shields, which will allow you to keep position. Those changes will still keep combat as fun as possible, but give those players that were feeling a little bit like that RNG was pushing it too much.
I had a
control.
few games of Dwellings where I did feel like combat and dice kind of hurt me, like kind of just hurt my game.
I've seen that.
And I had a friend who really was very critical of Dwellings because of that one system.
Yeah.
And I understood where he was coming from. From my experience so far playing in this, I actually really like the combat, and I've never felt like it's kept me from pursuing my own strategy. I have the choice whether or not I want to be a victim to it or take control of it. And so far, I've kind of just played the victim card. Yeah. I've allowed it to happen, and it hasn't always worked in my favor. It sometimes is very frustrating and very annoying, but I always knew that it's controllable. So the thing that I think is really cool here is going to be your scaling. So depending on how many ships you're fighting with, and depending on what abilities those ships have, you'll have a low bar on your number.
Oh, they were talking about the targeting?
Yeah, I might be rolling 3 dice, and let's say my targeting value is 2 because I have 2 ships in that battle. I suddenly get to re-roll everything below my targeting value, meaning 1s not only no longer exist for me, but they will continue being re-rolled until they land on something higher. That, to me, just feels controllable. It means I can squeeze people together if I need to subvert someone who just has a more powerful unit.
Yeah. And that what that does is your fleet can actually protect you, but also then you're risking that fleet. But Lucas got you because he's done a couple other changes. Unlike before where, say, a dragon couldn't come in at distance, this is space. So there's range, there's hyperspace, there's jumping.
You can pull everyone in.
There's also, and he understands...
Jumping with heavy barges is like just my favorite.
Yeah, whoosh, it's right there. There's something that he also understands, and which is that engine building is more important here. And a devastating loss would we absolutely wreck your game. So he's also built in a way that you can repair your lost ships while you're coming back. There's protection here that actually says, we're going to have fun and we're going to let some things happen, but they're not going to be punishing things. They're actually going to be fixable.
And if you use them right, being defeated or being engaged in a battle, even if you're not the strongest player, can sometimes be tactically the best move you've made. Yeah. Now, you have to, it's only pointed and it's only purposeful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of the points we wanted to go over.
Yeah,
Are there any other major things you wanted to share with the audience? Because I know over the next, we're filming this about 5 months out, but let's say over the next 3 to 4 months, you all are going to be sharing a ton of new information, doing secret projects, possibly giving people a chance to access some cool extra surprise stuff.
Yes, we've got some surprises for you.
And so they should become connected with you, because what I wanted to do here is I wanted to like pause it and start addressing some of the questions that I know people are going to be having while we had you in studio, while we had a chance to talk with you.
Appreciate it.
But the reality is, for the people that still want to know, and they really, really want to know, you're going to be putting out newsletters, you're going to be putting out updates, you're going to be talking about the mechanics, revealing new factions, showing crazy artwork, and responding and engaging with people.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we went to Gamefound is because you can update prior to the campaign. That's huge to me. What we've already done in 2 updates is start to talk about what raiders are, these extra beings that come out of the nebula and attack you, and we've started to reveal factions. And as we go, we're going to start talking about the game so that you're prepared, you know what's in it, and anyone who wants to comment and drill further, we're going to go over all that as we go. So I agree, it's here for you, and we're here to talk about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And thank you, by the way, for your, I thank you to everyone who's a support of these type of games. If there wasn't that love for Dwellings, we wouldn't push to find out what's at the edge of the Andromeda galaxy.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you for watching. Let us know if you have any questions down below. I'm sure you're going to be paying attention to the comment section, seeing what people are positing, and probably incorporating that in some ways into the updates that you're doing down the road. So, honestly, if you have a pressing question or something that you don't feel we've addressed so far, let us know that, because Peter will probably pull your quote and say, hey, here's the answer. Your hope, your goal right now, and part of the reason why we're down here 5 months early is to give everyone as much information about the title that you're releasing before you actually hit play.
Yeah.
Which is cool. It's something that, in my opinion, I don't see enough publishers walk into a room and basically just be like, hey, I got something good.
I mean, I've backed a lot, and some of them come out of nowhere, and the ones that actually can say, let me show you what this thing is full of, I get more engaged by that. Also, we're going to do our usual puzzles and fun and special things.
You guys like playing games with the audience.
We do. Actually, this reminds me of when we did launch Dwellings, we did have puzzles. We had all 8 elements had a puzzle, and then the last 4 were a way to solve that for a Minotaur. We've got some surprises on this one as well. But I really enjoy that stuff. I really enjoy getting into it. And for me, also, I mean, my favorite thing is dragons and wizards. So how can I sneak some of that cool fantasy into my sci-fi? That's what's going to happen here.
Oh, no. You told too much.
The question that we're all wondering, though, is are we going to get a Mortality Sphere plushie?
Fans of Flamecraft may have been asking for lots of fun things. I don't think we're going to see spaceship plushies. We may see, like I said, dragons sneak in our Mortality Sphere, and some other fun bad guys are going to be out there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Like I said, leave a comment down below letting us know your thoughts. We're going to be doing a ton of coverage. This is just the first prototype of this process. We're actually going to have another deluxeified kind of shiny looking one with more artwork finished and more stuff done.
Wait till you see the
nonsense that we're working on. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Bye.
Cheers.